Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing Pavel in the 15-minute pool on ICC. So I will play d4 against Pavel, and let's see what he wants to throw at me. Pavel is from Israel, 1891, and peak rating of, I will check in a second, 2085, achieved a few years ago. Okay, so we're going to have a King's Indian. And let's see what to do against the King's Indian. I'm thinking I'll play f3. This is a line that I played in a blitz game the other day where I blundered horribly and lost. But it's a new day. I have a lot of faith in this line. I've played it many times. So let's give it another shot. So c5 is very common. And here I can play bishop e3 if I want to give him the option of going into a Maraxi type position where he takes on d4. But d5 is the main move. This is very interesting. I'm just looking at this guy's finger notes. He has some intriguing notes. His last note says, "One day I'll compile a book of games of my grandfather, Lev Aronin. He was one of the strongest players in the 50s. Yeah, and he says his name is Pavel Aronin, my opponent here. A Russian-born Israeli, ELO of about 2100. So that's very interesting because I have heard of his grandfather, if that's in fact his grandfather, which it seems like it is. Lev Aronin, not to be confused with Lev Aronin, but Lev Aronin. In fact, I remember a game, Aronin versus Smyslov, and here the move is knight g3 just to open up the light square bishop. But a game, Aronin versus Smyslov, if you want to look it up, it's a game that Smyslov was able to draw despite losing pretty badly at one point in a rook and knight versus rook and bishop position. And Smyslov drew in an instructive pawn ending, basically by setting up a fortress. And Aronin is a big-time player, or was a big-time player, back in, like 1950s, like he said in his notes. So I guess chess runs in the family for him. So here black plays a number of different moves. a6 is usually thrown in at some point, just to try to threaten to play b5. And as policy, white will always meet a6 with a4. There's few circumstances where I would not do that. So this is just an automatic a4, stop b5. You don't want them expanding any further. So now black can look to play moves like knight bd7 or rook e8, or as I faced the other day, h5, trying to chase the knight by playing h4. These are all possible. And for white, I'm delaying the development of this dark square bishop. I don't want to bring it out to e3 yet. On move 6, bishop e3 is the main move. That's a normal Samisch. But in doing this, we've kept this bishop back, and now I have options like when I'm going to play this next move, bishop to g5, if I want. So the other day I had a game that went bishop g5, except the pawns were back on a6 and a4, and I'm wondering if that affects anything. I don't think it really does. If I wanted to, I could play bishop e2 in this position, and then after h4, play knight f1, with an eye towards playing bishop e3 and then knight d2 and then castling. But I still sort of think bishop g5 would be the way to go here. I don't know, though. Bishop e2 is also very interesting. Let's say bishop g5, and he plays queen b6, attacking the b pawn. I go queen d2, knight h7, bishop h4. The other day I had a game with g5, except again, the pawns were back on a6, a4. Bishop takes g5, knight takes g5, queen takes g5, queen takes b2. And I have rook c1 defending the knight. Really not much should change there. Okay, let's go bishop g5. This is the principled move. This is one of the reasons you have delayed the development of the dark square bishop if you're playing this line. Just trying to frustrate his plan of h5, h4. Because if I had to play bishop e2 and he gets to go h4, it does cost some tempos in order to play the knight f1 reorganizational move. Queen e8. My first thought is that is very awkward. It blocks his rook from coming to e8. It does get out of the pin. Is his idea, if bishop e2, to play knight h7? And then bishop h4, g5 would be a real threat. So let's say bishop e2, knight h7. Maybe I go bishop f4 then. Trying to attack that d pawn. I'm going to play this all the same. I'm very interested what his idea is. So if knight h7, let's say bishop e3. That would be the normal square to drop the bishop back to. He can play f5, which would use the pin. But I think I could just play queen d2 if I wanted to in that position. It's no big deal. All right, let's castle. Black often has trouble developing the light square bishop in this line. You can see here he's more than likely going for a fianchetto. So now queen d2 would be a typical move. Queen d2, bishop b7, let's say rook a e1. And I would like to go for f4 if possible. Yeah, let's start with queen d2. I feel like he's going to have to move this queen sometime soon. Maybe even to e5 if he gets ambitious enough. So the knight does come back to h7. Now, do I play bishop e3 or do I go bishop h6? Looking for a trade of the dark square bishops. Note that wherever I move the bishop, if he plays h4, it's not out of the question to play knight h1. I will have to play knight h1. I don't have any other flight squares for the knight, but this is normal. You go knight h1 and you get the knight out through f2. Now, which square? On one hand, my dark square bishop is my good bishop. So that's an argument against playing bishop h6 and willy-nilly offering a trade. On the other hand, if I play bishop e3, it's going to be harder to advance in the center because of all this congestion going on. So let's say I do play bishop h6 and he plays queen e5 and I take on g7. Probably he takes with the queen, I'm guessing. Maybe rook a d1 then. Let's say bishop b7, f4. That's probably a pretty good position for me still. If bishop e3 instead of bishop h6, let's say he plays bishop b7, maybe f4 then. Just not as thrilled about my bishop being on e3 for some reason. Okay, let's go bishop h6. Let's see if he wants to swap. I somehow doubt he'll voluntarily trade. I think he'll let me take on g7. In this line, both white and black often have good dark square bishops. So a trade might not be that bad for either side, really. I expect him to play bishop b7 or maybe queen e5. He plays queen e5. So if I take, he'll have a choice of taking with the king or the queen. Probably queen is what he'll do. I could play f4 now, but he'll go queen d4 check. Don't think f4 is the best at the moment. The timing on that move could be better. So let's trade first. He takes with the king. I'm a little surprised by that because I thought he wouldn't want to do that with f4 being a possibility. But if f4, he might be going queen d4 check. And then take, he has doubled c pawns, or double d pawns rather, but his knight is coming into c5. And my knight would have to go somewhere passive. So maybe I can just play rook a d1 to start if I'm not happy with f4, queen d4. That's a reasonable plan. He can't prevent f4 from happening. The only way I could see that is if he was willing to play h4, knight h1, g5, which will probably create more weaknesses than it's worth. Note if h4, f4, he does have queen d4 again. And after a trade, he would be attacking both of my knights. So maybe h4 is going to be played, because forcing my knight back to h1 is useful for him. It takes it several tempos to become relevant again through the f2 square. Let's say hypothetically he plays h4, knight h1, g5. I could play f4 right there. Pawn takes and then rook takes. And his h-pawn is awkwardly placed. Let's go back. This is one fun thing about this line. There's not too many openings where it's common to put your knight on h1, but in this line it is. So if he plays g5, which is the only way to stall me in going for f4, I could play f4 right away and then pawn takes, rook takes. I feel like his h-pawn is in jeopardy. And also, by playing g5, he weakens his f5 and h5 squares severely. He could play f5 in this position. But somehow, after f5, f4, let's say queen e7, knight f2, I think I'm doing well. So knight back to f6. So f4, there's no knight takes e4. I can just take his queen. So probably f4, queen e7 will be played, and then knight f2 would be the follow-up. Yeah, there's no reason not to play this move. If f4, queen d4, we trade, I don't think he has compensation there. Yeah, I don't see the comp, so we'll do this.
Check.
Really? You're really going to do this? Okay. Again, I don't see the comp. His knight gets c5, but what else is there? He gets some attack on this e-pawn. I think just knight f2 now would be fine. Do I want to play b4? Nah, maybe too early to play that. Just knight f2, I think. Reinforce the e-pawn. And if knight c5, I can decide if I want to play b4 or not. Looks like a good move, but I'm just a little leery of knight b3. I mean, his knight is almost caught behind enemy lines in that case, but say knight b3, rook d1, he could play a5 to try to get the knight out. Could create some technical problems. I feel like he almost lost his nerve there. Like, he took a one look at my advancing pawns and decided to bail out into an endgame, but it's not worth a pawn to do this. I would play knight c5 if I were him. I don't think he has too many other logical moves. This move makes sense too, but he should be looking to play knight c5 very soon. Again, I'm looking towards this b4 move, but just not quite sure about it yet. The c file is open, and it will be a point of contention. Unfortunately for us, I don't have access to that file as easily as he does. You can just swing one or both rooks over there. I could play rook c4, but I don't know. The rook doesn't seem optimally placed there, and I can't double up easily. Maybe rook c4 would be useful, though, just in trying to swap a pair of rooks. Maybe knight g4 right now. Also trying to swap a little bit. Let's do that. Any tricks I have to be aware of? I don't think so. Yeah, let's go for that. One point about knight g4 is that if I can take on f6 and get him to take, b6 becomes weak. So maybe rook b4 could be useful. I also think I have a better chance of eventually playing e5. So this trade makes sense. Okay, let's swap here. Expecting knight takes, yep. Okay, now I can play rook b4. And then after knight d7, I have bishop g4. That is useful. I like the look of that. Rook b4, knight d7, bishop g4. If he plays f5, I can just take. That's no problem. Okay, let's do that. Rook b4, is there any trick with, like, him taking on d5 or something? I'm looking at radical stuff like rook b4, rook takes c3, b takes c3, knight takes d5. Idea e takes d5, rook takes e2. But it really shouldn't be enough. I would doubt it. Okay, let's give this a shot. And there's no bishop takes d5 or knight takes d5 because I can take with my pawn and my knight on c3 defends the bishop. So none of those motifs appear to work. The only thing that worries me about the plan of knight d7 and bishop g4 is if he can throw in a5 somewhere. Let's say he does it right away. Oh, he does that. Okay. Yeah, so I think he's going to sack on c3 after I take with my pawn. Because if knight takes, bishop takes, then he's happy. I could play bishop takes a6, but he has rook a8. Okay, so let's do this. We're going to have to play a little faster now. He's going to have to take on c3. I'll pre-move that. Otherwise, he's not getting his material back. So I'm actually thinking rook takes c3, rook takes e2, and c4 now to securely defend that d pawn. Just wondering if h3 anywhere is annoying. I'll just play it. I think I have to play this move. If he plays h3 now, I can take b5, really. Keeps playing surprising moves. Okay, we'll take. Rook takes, he's going to go bishop a6. Rook b4, maybe rook c2, I guess. I could play rook a1 first. Bishop c8, take. That should be winning for me. Maybe rook a1 is the best way to shut down any counterplay. Or h3. I could go h3 as well. Uh-huh. h3 is getting a bit fancy, though. Let's go rook a1. So bishop c8, I'll take with the pawn. And if h3, g takes h3, bishop takes h3, b6, there's not enough threats against my king to trouble me. And that b pawn is marching. Because if I had played rook takes b5 on the previous move, he does get to go bishop a6 with some counterplay. Bishop a6, rook b4, rook c2, and I think he wins that pawn back. So this way, I'm keeping him pinned. I'm stopping bishop a6. I'm giving my king a little bit of room to run. I'm actually going to pre-move g takes h3, because I think there's a pretty good chance he'll play that. The only other move that makes sense, I think, is bishop c8, which will probably transpose. Bishop c8, c takes b5. He's got to go for h3. He's got to do something against my king. So, yeah, we'll just do this. Bishop back now. Okay. Maybe king f1. Just to ask his rook what it plans to do. Yeah, let's do that. I think he'll play rook d2. b6 now. So if bishop takes d5, I have b7. The b pawn is decisive. It was nice to include king f1, because if I did the same line with b6, bishop takes d5, it's actually probably winning, but he would get to play rook takes g2 with check. Now he doesn't get rook takes g2 with check. He could play bishop takes d5, b7, bishop takes g2 with check, but then I have king e1. Yeah, so he just resigned. Okay, so a turning point in the game was for sure his decision to play queen d4 check, because he just lost a pawn out of that, and he never approved compensation. Let's have a look. So my pet knight ge2 line, which I initially picked up by looking at the games of Grandmaster Alexei Dreyev. This is one of his principal weapons against a King's Indian. He's played it dozens of times over the past, I don't know, about 2 decades, I'd say. And c5 is the main move for black. And after which I push d5, adopting a Benoni formation. So you can also play this way against Benoni too. You can play f3 and knight ge2. e6 undermining, knight g3. A real nice aspect of this entire line, and the Samisch in general, is the chain of light square pawns kind of restricting his light square bishop. It makes it very hard for him to bring this piece into the game. So he played a6, and as I said, we automatically meet that with a4. Then he went h5 and bishop g5. So I had a game the other day where, again, with the pawns back on a7 and a4, my opponent went queen b6. I played queen d2. They played knight h7, bishop here, and now g5. Bishop takes, knight takes, queen takes, and black wins the b2 pawn, but white has this. And I'm pretty sure even here, with the pawns being where they are, it shouldn't change the assessment that white is doing well. Yeah, that looks to be the case. So I would have been okay going into that. Instead, he played this somewhat bizarre-looking move, queen e8. Never seen that. I don't think it's that great of an idea. I guess the main plan is to bring the queen to e5 at an opportune moment, but it appears to be too awkward to me. I don't think it's worth it, that temporary activity you get with queen e5, to disrupt the normal flow of your development, especially the rook coming to e8. So bishop e2, he played knight bd7. I castled. The engine likes queen d2 more. And then knight h7, now bishop h6. That seems similar. But I castled instead. He played b6, and now queen d2. So very simply, if he had played bishop d7, I would probably be trying to enforce the f4 break. Maybe I would feel better with rook ae1 being played, having the rook lined up with his queen and backing my e-pawn. So this is comfortable for white. So he played knight h7 and bishop h6. I was debating between bishop h6 and bishop e3. And it looks like bishop h6 is a little bit better. His dark square bishop is a valuable defender. We both have good dark square bishops, but given my better development in coordination, I think it's okay to make this trade. So queen e5, I swapped. And rook a d1. The engine prefers rook fd1, but I would have a hard time playing rook fd1. That's not a human move. I look at this and I see the area of operation being the center and to some extent the king side, and I want my rooks on d1, f1, not d1 and a1, b1, or c1. So rook a d1, plays h4, and I retreat the knight to h1. Cool aspect of this line. And we get to go f4, so major turning point right here. He plays queen d4 check, but I really thought he should retreat his queen, queen e7. It doesn't look that fun for him, but I will have to weigh carefully the timing of the e5 pawn break if I ever play e5. Let's just say, hypothetically, we'll follow some of the engine moves here. Let's say I play bishop f3, bishop b7. Yeah, like now I can actually start looking at stuff like this, because if he takes, I play d6, and I'm winning a piece. But even so, it's probably worth it for him to start considering stuff like, yeah, maybe rook b8. Now that my bishop is no longer guarding the b5 square, maybe he can try to go b5. Something like this. Much more difficult for white than in the game, even if the engine still thinks white's better. I think this is a superior chance for him than just giving up the pawn.
Check.
So queen d4, rook e8. I'm happy to get the knight to f2 and help defend e4. Bishop b7. Knight h3 would be a funny move. I guess trying to come to g5? I don't know. I like knight g4. And he went here. Now e5. Well, the computer was saying e5 for a second. It also likes bishop f3. And what about my move? Knight takes f6. And then rook b4. This also looks good. So main idea being knight d7, bishop g4. With pressure. And I was thinking if he defends the knight somehow, I can take it and then take on b6, and I'm up 2 pawns. And also his light square bishop is very poor. Remember what this rook b8 move's about. So rook b8, if I just take, is he taking on e4? Okay. So that's a good point. I do have e4 defended less than I did when the knight was on f2. So in playing rook b4 and going after his b6 pawn, I am taking some liberties with the defense of that pawn. I am threatening to take on b6, though, so the point of rook b8 is that after rook takes b6, he doesn't have to move his bishop, so he does have time for knight takes e4. That's a hard move to see, though. I would think more people would think about playing rook c7. Yeah, and then bishop f3 makes sense to reinforce this pawn and initiate the threat of rook takes b6 again. Even here, there's e5 possibilities. And if he takes, I play d6. Double attack. This should probably be a technically winning position for white. It just takes some care. Yeah, now he went for it with knight takes d5, which wasn't a good decision, but it's not easy playing down a pawn and you're suffering. You're going to be looking for any chance you think you might have, and he decided his best chance was connected with sacrificing the exchange and trying to get his rook and his bishop working together, ideally towards my king, with bishop takes d5 and the threat on g2, but that never materializes for him. So I played c4. I like that a little bit better than rook d1. I'd rather play c4 and defend this pawn with one of my pawns and leave my rook freed up to do other things. Yeah, now he played this. One line I looked at was, or at least considered, was h3, take, and then bishop here. And I think I saw that I had this move. And then if he checks me king g2 and I defend this pawn, might still require some technique, but something like this should be winning for white. The only danger to me is if he coordinates these two pieces. And even then I can allow it. It's just I don't want him to be able to do some sort of windmill like with a bishop on d5 and a rook on g2. That would be the absolute worst case scenario. So c4, he went for b5. Take, take. Aha, engine likes my rook a1 move. I was slightly concerned that this was too sophisticated and that I should just take the pawn and not worry about it, but yeah, I felt like this would be somewhat tricky. He wins c4 and maybe d5 can be won as well. And he's pinned along the b file, so I don't think there's any rush, so hence rook a1. And he did this, and I get to take on b5 with the pawn. If h3, I can simply take. He takes this bishop, and then just b6 is good enough. He has one check, but no follow-ups. My back rank is fine. Nothing doing for him. So he played the bishop back to b7. I played king f1. Again, like b6, this would be fine. Something like this. b7, rook takes g2. Check. I just didn't want to have to entertain some bizarro case like this where he might get checks, even though this is totally winning. King f1 really is a move to secure the victory. Now b6, and he resigned, because if his bishop does not capture and allow me to play b7, then I'm playing rook a7 next move and going b7 anyways. So, okay, nice game. I think this illustrates some key concepts, especially with white trying to advance in the center. But for sure, black's play can be improved. I think queen e8 is too experimental. It should not be played. So thank you guys for watching. I'll be back tomorrow with another standard game. Talk to you guys later. Bye.